Senator Ben Sasse is here. The junior Republican senator from Nebraska was elected in 2014. His voting record in the Senate places him among the more conservative members of the Republican caucus. He was also the most prominent member of the Never Trump movement during the 2016 presidential campaign. He has a new book. It is called The Vanishing American Adult, Our Coming of Age Crisis, and How to Rebuild a Culture of Self-Reliance. It offers advice on how to raise more resilient children in today's uncertain world. I am pleased to have him at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I want to talk a little bit about Republican politics first before we talk about the book,
sure,
which is an important book in terms of what's happening in institutions and family in our society. What's going to happen to the health care debate in the Senate?
I don't think we know. So the one big myth out there is that Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was passed by reconciliation. It wasn't. It was passed with 60 votes before Ted Kennedy died, and then it was modified by reconciliation. But that means there's a broad public understanding, especially for folks on the right, that Obamacare can be repealed and replaced with a bare simple majority.
Simple majority.
Exactly. So instead of needing 60 votes for regular order, reconciliation gives you a pathway to do certain things by 51. Obamacare is basically...
Which was used in the confirmation of the...
Of Justice Gorsuch, correct. So, first of all, I don't think that... I'll put my cards on the table here to your point about conservative voting record. I don't think that Obamacare solved a whole bunch of problems. I think it helped a bunch of people, and I think it exacerbated a bunch of other problems. So I want to fully repeal and replace Obamacare. But Republicans are, naive isn't exactly the right word, but we're regularly talking to the public as if the problems in American healthcare began with Obamacare. And obviously, healthcare reform was needed before Obamacare. There are a whole bunch of structural problems in American healthcare.
Clinton administration tried.
Exactly. We are not doing the things you need to do to create a system where there's portability of health insurance across job and geographic change. Now, the political continuum from left to right should be about the debate about how much decentralized market mechanism you want in creating that portability or how much state control you want in creating that portability. But we should all agree that we want a system where there's health insurance coverage that goes with you across job and geographic change. Right now, we're not usually focused on the right things. One party's trying to defend Obamacare, and the other party is trying to criticize and attack Obamacare, but we're not talking about where we're trying to get. Right now, Republicans in the Senate are trying to get 50 of 52 of us, then plus Mike Pence, the vice president, as a tiebreaker, to use reconciliation to change Obamacare. But it's not going to fix the structural problems that are deeper than just the Obamacare architecture. I wish we were having a conversation about what kind of healthcare system we want in 10 years, and I wish both parties were participating in that. Right now, it's a one-party discussion. The Democrats, for a whole host of reasons, don't want to talk with us, and some Republicans think it's not necessary to talk to Democrats. And so we're having this conversation about 51 votes. We should be doing things that are more like 70% solutions.
What's the essential problem to create health care legislation that works?
Well, I think, first of all, you got to start with what's the essential problem in American healthcare. Right. The number one problem in American healthcare is that we don't have prices. That's why you don't get any higher quality, lower cost care over time. In almost every other sector of the economy, we expect that you're going to get higher quality, cheaper stuff over time. That never happens in healthcare.
Yeah, explain that to me. Higher...
If you think about your computer, you expect that next year, if you hold off on buying a new computer today and you buy it next year, you expect that you'll actually get more computing power at a higher speed for a cheaper price. When you buy a car, you expect that the car you're going to buy 5 years from now is going to be a heck of a lot better than the car you might have bought 5 years ago.
Yeah, but I don't assume
it's going to be cheaper.
Why is it going to be cheaper?
Well, I mean, on consumer pricing, almost every good in American life ends up getting cheaper over time. Technology yields higher quality, lower cost goods and services over time. We don't have that happening in healthcare, and one of the most basic reasons why is we don't have any pricing. And so American healthcare is dominated by third-party payment. That's primarily governmental third-party payment, and we pretend...
Medicare, Medicaid.
And so about 60 cents on every dollar spent in American healthcare touches the government somehow. And we have hospitals that are big general hospitals. You don't have focus factories where you disaggregate the parts of American healthcare delivery that should become more effective, higher quality, lower infection and risk rates over time, and cheaper. And I think one of the fundamental structural problems we have is we don't distinguish between catastrophic events events that we're trying to insure against, and the routine delivery of health care. And so one of the ways I think about how do we explain why American health care doesn't work? Well, think of any other insured marketplace and try to think about how could you mess it up as bad as American health care. So in property and casualty, imagine if you passed a law that Allstate and State Farm had to buy all of your gas and schedule all of your Jiffy Lube appointments. I submit to you that Jiffy Lube will not be at the right locations. It won't be open the right hours. It won't have quality metrics that work. The customer service will be poor, and the prices will be ever growing and increasing. Not what really happens in oil changes. And so I think that we are regularly trying to...
Are you saying that Medicare, for example, dictates all that?
Yeah, Medicare pricing. So about 40% of most hospitals' actual receipts are driven by Medicare, but it drives the accounting systems for everything, the DRGs, the diagnostic groupings, and the codes that drive how we price don't allow us to disaggregate by different types of procedures so that we get higher quality, lower cost over time. Again, I get that a lot of people in our audience tonight may be for much more state intervention in healthcare delivery than I'm for, but I think we should all agree that in health financing, especially catastrophic insurance, what you'd like is a system where people don't become uninsured just because they change jobs. Right now, that's by far the largest driver of uninsurance in America. We talk about socioeconomics and poverty matters. We talk about health status and pre-existing conditions matter. But numerically, by far the largest driver of uninsurance in America is job change. And when we get to the book later, we'll talk about how average duration at a firm is getting shorter and shorter. And so right now, most Americans go through a period where they have 6 months of uninsurance every 3.5 years. Well, that's when you get the breast cancer diagnosis. That's when you have the car accident. Now you create a new population with pre-existing conditions 5 and 10 years from now. I completely believe we could solve all the problems of today's pre-existing conditions population. It's about 3.5% of the public. There are
3.5% of the public have pre-existing conditions that might prevent them from getting insurance.
Correct. And there are 320 million Americans. That's about 10 million people. We could solve that problem.
Well, how would you solve it?
Well, I mean, if we picked a more government interventionist plan than I would ideally like, but it was just for 10 million people, I could live with that as a compromise. What I'm worried about is the another 10 million and another 10 million.
So you would have government pay for the pre-existing people who have pre-existing conditions and therefore unlikely to be able to get insurance.
I think that
or insurance would come with such either a high deductible or a high premium that it would be unpayable by them.
Well, I think, yeah, exactly. They either are uninsurable or they're insurable in a way that has so much cost prohibitive, right? Exactly. I think we could solve that problem for those folks. I want to solve the problem of 10 and 15 years from now. How do we not create another world of people with pre-existing conditions? Well, one of the things you want to happen is people to not become uninsured 3.5 years from now, when for the 6 months that they're changing jobs, they're now uninsured, then they have the car accident, then they have the breast cancer, and they can't get insured again. I want portability across job and geographic change. Right now, we're living off a tax accident from the 1940s, where employer-sponsored, large employer group insurance is what most Americans get their insurance through. It has a special tax subsidy that Nebraska's farmers and ranchers and small business people, they don't get that same tax subsidy.
What would be your... Let's turn to the book. So one more last question. So Tell me about the politics. You think it's likely that you'll use reconciliation?
Yes. But whether it's likely to pass something and whether or not that thing that's passed is good, those are two harder questions.
And then the House and the Senate will negotiate.
Yeah, but I would bet against us getting health care reform in this cycle. I mean,
What's this cycle mean? This president exists in Congress. Congress.
Now to 2018's election.
And what is the politics of that? Some say that it's a lose-lose. On the one hand, a lot of people will say that the Republicans promised that they would replace Obamacare, and they didn't, so I'm going to vote against them. Others say if you had health care, if you passed what the Republicans are doing, it will so hurt the constituency that elected Donald Trump that they would be outraged.
I think there are two big ways to fail. We can fail by failing to pass a bill. Republicans for 7 years have been running on repeal and replace Obamacare. That's one way to fail.
That's Paul Ryan's line.
A second way to fail, though, would be to pass a bad bill. Yeah. And if you pass a bill where the individual market continues to implode, as has been happening under Obamacare the last 4 years, and premiums continue to rise at unsustainable rates, if you continue to have a constriction of the number of choices and plans offered in states like mine, you have a lot of counties where they're down to only one insurer, 1 in 2 insurers in huge parts of the country. If Republicans pass a plan that says it's going to solve those problems and those problems aren't solved, that's a second way to lose.
Do you think the president understands health care?
It's hard to figure out how he would talk about health care if he had to give you any of the policy details. Obviously, he wasn't elected on an agenda where the American people were expecting him to be Bill Clinton or Barack Obama level wonky. But it's difficult to know what the president's priorities would be on health care reform.
Why did you write this book?
I am worried that we have a whole bunch of our kids stranded in a state of perpetual adolescence. Adolescence is a special gift. It's a concept that's probably only about 2 millennia old, that if you live in a part of the world that isn't in abject poverty or isn't war-torn, you've kind of got this greenhouse phase of life where for 18 months to 4 years you hit puberty and you're biologically an adult, and we don't say push you out of the nest. You have to be a fully independent adult, emotionally, economically, morally, in terms of school leaving, household structure. You don't have to go be a full adult right away. We transition you. That's great, but it's a bad thing if it becomes a destination. And right now, we, for a whole bunch of reasons, largely because of our place and time in economic history, we have a lot of our students stranded in Neverland. And
Peter, they're living at home, meaning
that it's hard to distinguish 10-year-olds from 15-year-olds from 20-year-olds from 25-year-olds.
Yes,
that's a new thing in human history.
Yeah, it really is.
It is. And this is not an old man screaming, "Get off my lawn." This is a constructive book. It's not a blame-laying book. But if I were going to lay blame, I'm not beating up millennials. I'm beating up us 40-something parents.
Because we did not?
I think we have not done a good job of celebrating scar tissue with our kids. We are bubble wrapping them at a time.
Celebrating risk and celebrating celebrating the joy of trying.
Yes. Yeah, it is. Scabs are okay.
Yeah.
Stitches are okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And our kids are living at the richest time and place in all of human history, and somehow we've drifted to this cultural assumption that the way to love your kids is to protect them from those hard experiences, to protect them from work. And I think parents who love their kids and think about it a lot, I think there's a burgeoning movement of parents in the country who are really worried about the way we're raising our kids. They know
because of what it's doing to the kids.
Yeah, and it's not good for the kids to be in this protected cocoon, but it's certainly not good for a republic either. We need these kids to ultimately become the leaders of the country, and they're going to go through job disruption when they're 40 and 45 and 50 in ways that's never happened before in human history. They're going to have to be resilient.
Job disruption because?
We live in a weird time in economic history, right? I think there are 4 stages of economic history: hunter-gatherers, agriculture, right, industrialization, and this thing, which we don't know what to call it.
Well, some call it the information age.
Right, but sociologists are now just throwing in the towel. It could be the mobile economy, the IT economy, the digital economy. Right. Sociologists are now calling it post-industrial, which is another way of saying it's after the last thing.
Yeah, exactly. 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 Like postmodern architecture.
Yeah, we didn't call industrialization de-agriculturalization. Yeah. We didn't call it post-agricultural. We ultimately figured out that the big tool economy was a pull, and technological substitution in agriculture was a push, and it created a new world. This thing, we don't really know what the pull will be to yet, but it's not true that industrial jobs are coming back.
Does this thing have the problems you describe and the solution that you recommend have anything to do with politics?
No. This book is 100% not about politics.
I don't mean by that Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, sure.
I mean the idea that this has something to do with a political solution.
No, but it's a tiny bit policy-oriented, but it definitely is not political in the sense that you could pass one piece of legislation and you could fix this. It's about cultural issues that are well upstream from politics, but it's certainly concerned with the American experiment.
And what are the cultural issues?
I think America was founded on the idea, sort of a Tocquevillian understanding of where happiness comes from. And people's lives are ultimately rooted in their jobs. They're rooted in their families. They're rooted in their friendships.
It's always love and work, isn't it?
It is love and work. It is not, but when I say it's not about politics, what I mean is there's no power solution to this. It's ultimately about our appetites and our affections and our loves. And right now we're raising a generation of kids that are becoming more and more passive. There really is a belief that somehow going to the top of a mountain on your friend's Instagram might be an adequate substitute for going to the top of a real mountain.
By
it's
yourself
not true.
or with your friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's and do we have enough evidence to know what the impact is?
No, I don't think we do. The declining sense of work experience in your teen years is brand new, right? I'll give you an anecdote. I became a college president at age 37. Right. When I got there, I didn't think of myself as much older than the students. I'm a historian by training, but I was named as the college president because I'm a crisis and turnaround guy by business work history. Nobody thought they were calling me to this college because I knew student life or student culture. And yet the thing that I kept losing sleep over.
They had a problem they wanted you to fix.
Yeah, exactly. It was a 130-year-old college that was going bankrupt. They'd forgotten how to do student recruiting. They didn't know their value proposition. They had tenured faculty mostly in departments that didn't have students. They had growth potential in departments where, you know, they didn't have any tenured faculty and they couldn't add new costs. So I was a business turnaround guy. But the thing that kept me awake late at night was seeing the passivity of our student culture. And we had a big athletic arena. And Thanksgiving of 2009, a bunch of students are supposed to decorate a 20-foot Christmas tree in the sort of lobby entrance to the athletic arena. And they decorated the bottom 8 feet of the tree, and they spent all the decorations in the bottom 8 feet, and then they were walking away. And these were hardy and healthy, vital, vigorous kids. Like, these are kids who worked in the athletic department or in the development office. These are good jobs on campus. And the vice president for development walked by, and she said, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Why did you only decorate the bottom half of the tree?" And they said, "We didn't know how to get any higher." And she asked, "So did maintenance refuse to bring you a ladder?" And it turned out none of them had even thought to ask. Nobody organized the task. They just spent all the decorations and they were done and they were going to leave.
Yeah, I know.
And we had anecdote after anecdote after anecdote like that. And then you start looking at the data, and it turns out for the first time in human history, our teens and 20-somethings mostly have never done any work before when they get to college. I had only graduated from the same ag manufacturing farm town 20 years earlier, and when I went away to college, not a single kid in my town, whether they went to college after high school or went straight into the work world, none of us had ever not worked. The segregation of work from home is pretty new. The direct causal impact on the passivity of the students, hard to tell.
Yeah, my father would be on your side to a large degree because, I mean, he had a country store.
Yeah.
I literally started working when I was like 8.
Right.
You know, because he just thought, I mean, I think part of it was a family thing. He liked the family being together.
Yes.
My mother worked as well. But, I mean, I had responsibilities.
Right.
And he thought that was very, very important to show accountability, responsibility, self-reliance, that kind of thing. Because you talk about, we lost the culture of self-reliance.
Right. And the intergenerational point you make is critical. If you brought somebody from, 300 years ago or 3,000 years ago and you dropped them into modern American teenage life, obviously the first thing that would start
is this not true in places, is it less true in small towns? Is it less true in farming communities, that kind of thing?
I think it's probably a little bit less true because work is more closely connected to the home in farm towns. So where I live, an hour outside of Omaha, we still bus a lot of kids in the summer out to the cornfields to detassel corn. But if you live in suburbia, exurbia today, where can you get your kids work? Part of the concern of the vanishing American adult is we parents need to plan how to get our kids work experiences. It feels a little artificial, but it's a challenge we need to tackle together.
So how are you going to fix this?
So I think we need to pay attention to the habits that should define coming of age, and it's more than just progression through years in school. You need intergenerational experiences. You need to plan work exposure. You need to limit your consumption and have some limited stoic experiences. You need to become a literary traveler. America depends on a literate populace, and right now the data shows our people are reading less than ever before. Average American reads 19 minutes a day, and it skews with age. The older you are, the more you read. The younger you are, you're reading a lot less than 19 minutes a day.
So what are they doing?
Well, a lot of it is just passive digital addiction, right? I mean, if you
passive digital addiction.
Yeah, if you look at porn consumption rates,
it resonates everywhere.
Yeah, porn consumption rates in the last 12 years are spiking off the charts. Video game consumption, 18 to 24-year-old males, about 40% of them spend about half their waking hours playing video games. That's not the same thing as actually going out and conquering and hunting and courting in the real world.
Is America going to lose its greatness?
If we don't tackle this, we will, but I think we will succeed at tackling this. The analog here, I think, is...
Analog versus digital, or...
Oh, sorry, I mean, the analogy to this moment is industrialization. The belief, when you had mass urbanization, mass immigration across the seas and countryside to cities, so urbanization, industrialization, immigration, from 1870 to 1920, creating a new kind of economy. At the end of the Civil War, 86% of Americans still lived and worked on the farm. By World War II, 60% of us lived and worked in cities. When that happened, many people Republican Teddy Roosevelt, Democrat Woodrow Wilson said America can't go on. We're going to need a rule of the experts because you can't have a Tocquevillian theory of the village and of accountability and transparency as sort of a culture of virtue in the cities because there's just too much anonymity. They were wrong, happily. It turned out that the social capital, the dense networks, the relationality, the neighborliness of the village was recreated in urban ethnic neighborhoods. What's happening now is we're going through a transformation from that industrial economy and the cities to a kind of post-industrial economy in the mobile, digital, suburban, exurban suburbs. And I think that we haven't yet figured out what neighborliness and human capital looks like. I think we've got a crisis of loneliness in the country, and we're not paying attention to the degree to which social media is telling people it will replace real human friendships, but it doesn't. It can supplement them, but it can't replace them. We have a crisis
of loneliness.
There's some data that shows let's define friendship in a true Aristotelian sense. People who feel pleasure when you're happy and feel pain when you hurt. It's the way we parent, right? I don't choose to be sad when my kids hurt. I just hurt because I love them. I've got an expansive sense of the self, and it includes them. The average American had 3.4 friends in 1990. The average American has 1.8 friends today, a halving of deep relationships in 2.5 decades. 40% of American adults have no confidants, no one that they confide in about anything big and important. The calling that
This seems to me, I mean, these are parallel problems. On the one hand, you talk all about the vanishing American adult. Now you talk about another big problem we have, which is the idea of loneliness. That has nothing to do with this.
I think it does. I think the evaporation of the hollowing out of mediating institutions is directly connected to both of these. I think social capital rides on top of work. Work is a core anchor of human identity. Work is not just about how you put bread on the table. Obviously, it's critically important for that. But it's about dignity. It's about being needed. It's about having a place in the world.
It is. It really is. I mean, I think for people people really like not having a job are crazy. I mean, because it is such an assault on your dignity.
Right. The least happy people on earth are lottery winners, according to sociological data.
Because they have no need to work.
They have a massively expanded denominator of potential consumption, and the numerator of that fraction, how much of it they fill up by earned success and producing something, they're almost irrelevant to being able to meet their own needs, and it leaves them feeling hollow and empty. And we as a people have forgotten that work and vocation to do an older version of it.
Are you suggesting in some way that this is an answer, if we listen to you and change, it therefore becomes an answer to some of our political problems?
Oh, I think so. I think our political dysfunction is well downstream from this hollowing out of local community and mediating institutions and family structural breakdown. I think most Americans are not politically polarized. People who are consuming a lot of media, elite media, we know a world of hyper-political partisan polarization, right? But most people aren't doing that. Most people are checking out. But there is a sense that once you hollow out the local, then there's more tribal at the national, and we project grand hopes and dreams and meaning and good and evil. Manichaeanism between these two political parties, they're both too boring to carry anybody's grand hopes or dreams. The people I work with, we're not serious enough to solve most of these problems.
A couple of political questions before you go. How do you think President Trump did on his trip through the Middle East and now on to Brussels and then to Italy and now one last stop?
I think the dividends of it will take a little time to analyze, but I do want to affirm his attempt to try to bring some of the Sunni Arab nations into a conversation. I think we lived 28 years since the end of the Cold War. We still don't have a national security strategy for the age of cyber and jihad. And we still think, Peace of Westphalia, 1648, all the way to 1989, we think of global security issues in terms of nation states, and a lot of the key drivers of instability in the future are going to be all the ungoverned spaces around the globe. Between a quarter and a third of the nations on Earth don't really have a monopoly on violence inside their own borders. The sort of Al-Qaeda-Taliban distinction from 2001 that Americans kind of learned, which is Taliban didn't attack us, but they ran such a horrible nation that there were all these ungoverned spaces that allowed entities like Al-Qaeda to plot and to have global reach. We're going to have more and more of that going forward, and cyber is going to exacerbate those problems. We need America's allies to know that we keep our word and they can trust us. Iran is trying to undermine many nations in the Middle East, and it creates more of these ungoverned spaces, and it would be useful for us to have a pan-Sunni Arab alliance.
So in other words, you're in favor of what the president did exactly because of why the president said he did it. He wants to build an alliance between Israel, the Arab nation, the United States, and isolate Iran.
I think we should isolate Iran. They're the world's largest state sponsor of terror.
And this is the best way to do it.
Well, I think that it's hard to know how it plays out for the president when he hasn't had a coherent foreign policy, obviously, throughout the campaign and then in his transition in. But it's getting more coherent. I think the American people should take a lot of comfort from the fact that General McMaster is his national security advisor. He can build a policy process that actually enables real decision making by a lot of the impressive folks in the administration. Jim Mattis is one of the most impressive people at the Pentagon in half a century. And Jim Mattis wants to build a relationship with state and Secretary Tillerson, which is unlike usually happens in most administrations. Usually you have state and defense at bureaucratic loggerheads. In this case, there's some impressive stuff happening, but I think the fruit will be well in the future. We'll need to actually sound a consistent note for months on end.
You've raised questions about this president when he was a candidate. In the end, how has he failed and why has he failed, if he has failed?
Well, I think that everybody in public life has an obligation to see themselves as a civics teacher, as darn near the heart of their calling. And we have 41% of Americans under age 35 telling pollsters now that they think the First Amendment is dangerous. You might use your freedom of speech to say something that would hurt somebody else's feelings. It's kind of the point of America, actually, is that we protect each other's right to be wrong.
Right.
We think the most important things are, as you said, things of the heart, love, poetry, persuasion, voluntarism, local community. And government and politics exist to provide a framework for ordered liberty, not to try to solve every problem. And I don't think right now that the president spends a lot of time thinking about 5 and 10 years from now, what will we have done to rebuild public trust? What will we have done to help young people understand the First Amendment? How can we celebrate the freedom of press, speech, religion, assembly? So the First Amendment is the beating heart of America. And right now, the tendency for these two parties to act like either of them have ideas that are interesting enough, if you could just vanquish the other party from the field, that then you'd be able to advance your great policy agenda. And again, I say this as one of the most conservative guys in the Senate by voting record, but I view the things we're voting on as a continuum from here to here, and the things we should be voting on are much larger policy, and above that, there needs to be a shared American narrative about who we are as a people.
Does that kind of creativity exist in the political class that we have running the country?
Not today. I think.
So you're basically saying that the leaders we have today are not capable of providing the solutions that are necessary.
I don't think anybody would accuse Washington, D.C. of being too focused on the long term right now. I think we have about 2/3 of the folks serving in the Congress, their biggest long-term thought is their own incumbency. And we have generational challenges before us. Some are about the nature of work. Some are about cyber warfare. A whole bunch of them are about basic civic understanding.
With the impact of technology, one of the basic questions we have to understand is in terms of what happened to the people who will be displaced, and is it a government solution, or is it a realization that we have to change our sense of what a quality of life means?
Yeah, Great question. I'm not in favor of a universal basic income as a solution, but I want that to be debated because that's a big idea that helps. Larry Summers talks about, we have 7.2 billion people on the earth. We're going to have 9 billion people on this globe by 2050. And yet we're probably going to go in that same period from needing 4.5 billion workers to 4 to 3.5 to 3 to 2.5 billion workers. Well, that isn't just about productivity, as we discussed. That's fundamentally about dignity and meaning and hope. And the opioid crisis is epiphenomenal of a lot of hopelessness in our economy. And those kinds of problems, I think, are only going to get bigger. And we're not debating those big structural problems yet.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for
Vince Asti. Vanishing American Adulthood is much more than that. Our coming-of-age crisis and how to rebuild a culture of self-reliance. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.